March 27, 2026. We are in the 5th year and day 32 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome. I greet you to the Situation Report. In today's report, we see various attacks around the city of Kostyantynivka on both sides. But we also see further attacks on Russian oil infrastructure, including some that have already been hit and have now suffered another strike, as well as a brief look at the Russian economy. Because we see that the Kostyantynivka Kremlin now has to beg certain people, among many other things. In the southern outskirts of Kostyantynivka, Ukrainian forces are currently not only stabilizing defensively, but are increasingly taking the initiative themselves. Reports indicate that active efforts are being made there, not only to block Russian movements, but also to outflank and put them under pressure from the sides. This refers to this direction of attack. In the past few days, the Russians have managed to capture roughly this area from here further north, basically this territory here. And they are trying to capture the neighborhood to the west from there, as well as to advance further into the town. Here, the Ukrainians are putting up quite a strong resistance. Here, it's a bit harder to block, mainly because of the supply routes. The Russians are also continuing their attacks here on the west side of the river, trying to cut off the Ukrainian logistical connection, which would make the next step the encirclement of this town here, something the Ukrainians are, of course, now trying to prevent. Instead of just holding out as usual and pulling back at the last moment to inflict the greatest possible losses on the Russians, they are now actively attacking themselves. So this approach points to a strategy where they are not only attacking head-on, but also working with flanking maneuvers. The goal seems to be to locally pin down Russian positions and restrict their freedom of movement. Such maneuvers are especially effective when enemy forces are tied down in fixed positions, like here along the road, and have limited options to retreat. Especially in the urban and semi-urban terrain around Kostyantynivka, such a situation can escalate quickly. If they succeed in cutting off certain sections from supplies or from the rear, the affected units quickly come under increased pressure, even without being completely encircled. The current situation thus indicates a shift of initiative in this local sector. Instead of pure defense, a combat situation is emerging in which Ukrainian forces are trying to reverse the momentum and actively force Russian positions into a reactive role. According to the General Staff, Ukrainian forces have struck key facilities of the Russian refinery in Krygi. The attack took place on the 26th. The March attack targeted several facility processing units. Among those affected are the primary distillation units, which play a key role in crude oil processing. In addition, facilities for hydroprocessing, bitumen production, and gas fractionation are also reported to have been damaged. This means that several stages of further processing within the same refinery are affected at the same time. The refinery in Krygi is one of the most important processing sites in Russia. Facilities like these serve as the first and central processing units where crude oil is separated into different fractions. If this section fails or is restricted, it has immediate effects on all downstream processes. The simultaneous damage to several specialized units therefore indicates an attack that does not just target storage or individual sections, but the functionality of the entire processing chain. Accordingly, the impact may not be limited to individual products locally, but can significantly affect the overall performance of the facility. The attack is therefore part of a series of strikes against energy-related infrastructure, in which not only storage facilities, but also complex industrial processes are increasingly being targeted. After there were already attacks on key Russian Baltic seaports a few days ago, this development is now continuing. With Primorsk and Ust-Luga, two of the most important hubs for Russian energy exports, are once again in focus, and these are exactly two of those that were already hit in recent days. Current reports speak of a new wave of attacks on both locations. Both in Primorsk and in Ust-Luga, there were extensive fires within the port facilities. Available footage once again shows heavy smoke, indicating ongoing fires in parts of the infrastructure. The situation in Primorsk is particularly striking. There, in addition to a fire on land, there was also a fire on at least one ship at the pier, which has since been extinguished. This shows that not only storage areas, but also immediate loading processes are The interface between the port and transportation were affected because the terminals are actually high-value targets for the Ukrainian side, since without terminals, ships can't be loaded, and without loaded ships, no money can be made. The focus is shifting further from pure storage capacity to functional elements of the export system. If, in addition to tank farms, ships or pier facilities are also damaged, this directly affects the ability to actually load and transport oil and products. The repeated hits in quick succession further increase the pressure on the key points, since alternatives within the same region are limited, and repeated damage can increasingly disrupt operations. So we see that the attacks on Russian oil depots and energy producers are continuing. All of this is not something we've only been observing for a few days, but for almost 2 years and almost every week. And on the side, there's an absolute war of attrition going on, which is hardly making any progress, is costing Russia enormously, and there's no end in sight. Whether it's equipment, people, or financial resources that Russia is losing here, Russia is not a country with a high gross domestic product, but instead, it has high inflation, increased taxes, and a low average income of just about 800 euros per citizen. Of course, it's very difficult for a Russian citizen to lead a normal life when a piece of butter already costs almost 4 euros, and even staple foods like potatoes or onions continue to rise in price. Since the Kremlin already wants to plunder the Russian pension funds and has already raised taxes, they can hardly squeeze the poor citizens any further to finance the war, especially when one or another loyal taxpayer dies at the front, or, which would be even worse for the state, comes home crippled and continues to live at the expense of others. In the search for money, a new path is now being taken, one that was actually considered very unpopular. According to reports, Putin has pressured leading Russian oligarchs behind closed doors to make financial contributions to the state. The background is the adjusted budget situation, which is worsening further due to the ongoing high costs of the war. According to the Financial Times and the portal The Bell, the meeting specifically focused on financing military expenditures and continuing the war. In this context, it is reported that the businessman, Suleiman Kerimov, has pledged a payment of around 100 billion rubles. Officially, the Kremlin rejects this account. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov also stated that the initiative did not come from the president, but naturally from all the brave and loyal businessmen themselves. At the same time, the economic conditions worsen. Declining revenues from energy exports, intensified by repeated attacks on the relevant infrastructure, coincided with high government spending. In addition, of course, there are the effects of Western sanctions, as well as an overall weaker economic dynamic. Measures such as the increase in value-added tax last year show that attempts are already being made to tap into additional sources of revenue. But of course, the prospects remain limited. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development expects only modest economic growth for the current year, about 0.6%. Taken together, this creates a picture in which the state is increasingly dependent on alternative sources of financing, while at the same time, the financial needs remain high due to the ongoing war. And now I'd like to add something here before someone writes it in the comments, because I can already see the comments coming saying things like, oh man, they're at war and it's not even going well, but still they have economic growth of 0.6%. Yes, that's correct. But of course you have to see it this way. This growth is mainly promoted by the state, with the government itself stimulating, subsidizing, and financing the war economy so that the war can continue. If we take a look at all the economic sectors on the Russian side, you can see above all that it's the war economy. And as I myself like to say, the florists are also benefiting greatly from the war. And of course, on paper, this boosts the economy, while completely different sectors keep growing. That's what happens. In the Dnipro basin, a new phase of trench warfare has now been ongoing for 2 months, without either side being able to achieve significant operational progress. The combat situation remains largely characterized by limited advances, counterattacks, and shifting local focal points. The situation around Primorske is somewhat more dynamic. There, A Ukrainian counterattack at the end of February led the Artan and Timur units to engage the Russian assault group of the 108th Airborne Regiment back in the northern part of the settlement. At the same time, another Russian group was encircled in the area of Rykne. In the following weeks, Ukrainian special forces gradually managed to clear Rykne of Russian forces and also gained further control over a central zone of Primorske. In Stepnohirsks itself, however, the situation remains unchanged. Ukrainian forces continue to hold the forward positions in the center of the settlement, especially in the area of the destroyed apartment blocks. The position is regularly attacked by the Russian side. However, especially from the western direction, the settlement has so far been held after several counterattacks. Not the settlement itself, but the Ukrainian position. It's located roughly up here in this area, and the rest of the settlement is still controlled by the Russians. They always attack from this side, so basically from the western direction. The Russians attack, holding everything from the main road down here themselves, and the Ukrainians are not making any further progress here. In the past, we've often seen that when the Ukrainians can't make progress at a certain spot for several weeks, they usually end up losing control over the area, which the Russians can then easily push into. In the Russian information space, after recent Ukrainian long-range attacks, there is renewed speculation about which routes the deployed drones used to reach their targets. We already reviewed the attacks at the start of the situation report. One claim that comes up particularly often is that they could have flown through the airspace of Western neighbors, such as Poland or the Baltic states. However, it is noticeable that although this theory has been circulating for quite some time, it has not yet been supported by solid evidence. May relied only on graphic representations, arrows on maps that someone drew, and speculations in Telegram channels, but not on publicly verifiable evidence. For example, a video from a civilian who recorded the drone flying over, that alone would be enough, but that's exactly what's missing here as well. It's also remarkable that there hasn't been any clear diplomatic escalation from the official Russian side towards the states in question so far. Because if they had actually come from what I'll call NATO airspace, then of course the Kremlin would have made a huge fuss about it. So it's likely that there isn't any solid evidence or that their own side can't reliably assess the situation. I think it's more just that there's a sense of pain there. Admitting that the Ukrainian drones are able to move through Russian airspace even over long distances, to be shot down because the Russian side simply lacks air defense that can operate comprehensively across the area, especially with such relatively slow systems, which were also used for the attack here. The question is, of course, justified as to why they were able to operate for such a long period without being consistently stopped. So the debate reveals less about confirmed knowledge of the actual flight routes and more about the growing nervousness regarding the range, frequency, and impact of Ukrainian attacks deep inside Russian territory. New footage from the Ukrainian military commissioner and military intelligence suggests that Ukrainian forces are specifically targeting Russian missile systems in Crimea. The released material is said to document several successful hits that took place over the past month. 6 hits have been reported in recent weeks, including multiple operational tactical systems of the Iskander type, as well as Bastion coastal defense systems. In one case, it is said to be clearly visible how an associated depot was hit, as well as a Bastion M system coming under attack. Another one, which is associated with modern missiles, is listed here. And that's something remarkable at this point because this time these are systems that are used both for attacks on Ukrainian territory and for controlling maritime areas. Their engagement is therefore not only aimed at individual air defense platforms, as we have seen in the past, but above all at attack or defense systems. What is also striking is the frequency of the reported hits. There have been repeated attacks on similar systems recently. This suggests the locations are being identified and deliberately targeted again. That requires effective reconnaissance as well as the ability to operate precisely even in heavily protected areas. Thank you to all subscribers, Keramic, Algae Crew, and especially Lieutenant Colonel Renica, Celia Dietrich, Ferdy, and Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Until the next situation report.